The grocery order was always the same: 2 cans of soup, 1 loaf of bread, a single banana. Ezra Valdez had been delivering to 412 Willowbrook Lane for 8 months, and the routine never varied. The elderly man who answered the door always paid in exact change from a coffee tin, always said thank you in a voice barely above a whisper, and always closed the door before Ezra could say goodbye. Until the Tuesday when everything changed, and Ezra learned that some silences carry the weight of unspeakable loss. The suburb of Maplewood sat 20 minutes outside Springfield, Illinois, a collection of modest homes where American flags hung from front porches and neighbors still waved from their driveways. Ezra had been working for Freshmart Delivery since dropping out of community college, telling himself it was temporary while he figured out his next move. At 22, he was still searching for direction, living paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery. The job suited his restless nature. Different neighborhoods every day, brief interactions with customers, number office politics or demanding supervisors. He liked the independence, the way he could listen to podcasts while driving between deliveries, the occasional conversations with lonely customers who seemed grateful for human contact. But 412 Willowbrook Lane was different. The man who lived there, according to Ezra's delivery app, was named Cornelius Brightwater. Every Tuesday and Friday, the same order appeared: 2 cans of Campbell's chicken noodle soup, 1 loaf of Wonder Bread, 1 banana. Total cost, $7.43. Tip, exactly 57 cents to make $8 even. The house itself was a small ranch-style home with faded blue siding and a front yard that had once been meticulously maintained, but now showed signs of gentle neglect. The hedges needed trimming, and weeds pushed through cracks in the sidewalk. But the American flag still flew proudly from a pole beside the front steps, and someone had planted marigolds in a small garden bed beneath the living room window. Cornelius appeared to be in his 80s, with silver hair that always looked freshly combed and clothes that were clean but worn. He walked with a slight shuffle and kept one hand on the doorframe when he answered, as if the simple act of standing required careful balance. His eyes were a pale blue that seemed to hold depths of memory, but he never made direct eye contact. With Ezra, the transaction was always identical. Cornelius would open the door, accept the paper bag with a quiet thank you, count out exact change from an old Folgers coffee tin, and close the door with a soft click. No small talk, no weather comments, no questions about Ezra's day, just polite, minimal interaction that left Ezra feeling somehow dismissed. After 3 months of these deliveries, Ezra began to wonder about the man's story. The sparse grocery orders suggested someone living alone, eating simple meals, perhaps on a fixed income. The marigolds in the garden and the well-maintained flag suggested someone who still cared about appearances, who took pride in small details. But the isolation felt deliberate, almost protective. You ever wonder about your regular customers? Ezra asked Destiny Washington, his supervisor at Freshmart, during one of his weekly check-ins. Destiny looked up from her computer screen, her expression patient but busy. She had been managing delivery drivers for 5 years and had heard every type of customer story imaginable. Which customer? Guy on Willowbrook Lane. Cornelius Brightwater. Same tiny order twice a week. Never talks. Always pays exact change. Some people like their privacy, Destiny replied. As long as he's paying and you're delivering, that's all that matters. But Ezra couldn't shake his curiosity. There was something about Cornelius's careful politeness, his precise routine, that suggested a man trying very hard to maintain control over a life that had somehow become very small. The breakthrough came in November during an early snowfall that made driving treacherous. Ezra was running late with his Tuesday deliveries, and when he knocked on the door at 412 Willowbrook Lane, it took longer than usual for Cornelius to answer. When the door finally opened, Ezra was shocked by what he saw. Cornelius was dressed in what appeared to be military dress blues, the uniform immaculate despite its obvious age. Ribbons and medals decorated the chest, and the brass buttons gleamed as if they had been polished that morning. "I'm sorry," Cornelius said, his voice carrying a formality that hadn't been there before. "I was getting ready for an appointment." Ezra handed over the paper bag, trying not to stare at the uniform. "No problem, sir. Those are some impressive medals." For the first time in 8 months, Cornelius looked directly at him. His pale blue eyes held a mixture of pride and something that might have been pain. "Overseas deployment," he said simply. "Different lifetime." Before Ezra could respond, Cornelius had counted out his exact change and closed the door. But something had shifted in that moment. A crack in the careful wall the old man had built around himself. The next Friday, Ezra arrived to find Cornelius back in his usual civilian clothes. But the brief connection seemed to have changed their dynamic slightly. When Ezra handed over the groceries, Cornelius hesitated before closing the door. "You're always very prompt," he said, his voice still quiet but less distant. "I appreciate punctuality." "Thank you, sir. I try to stick to the schedule." Cornelius nodded approvingly. "Schedule is important. Routine keeps things manageable." It was the longest conversation they had ever had, and as Ezra drove to his next delivery, he found himself thinking about the word manageable. What was Cornelius managing? What required such careful routine and isolation? Over the following weeks, their interactions gradually expanded. Never long conversations, but small exchanges that revealed glimpses of the man behind the careful politeness. Cornelius would comment on the weather, ask if the roads were clear, mention that the marigolds were doing well despite the cold. Ezra learned that the old man had lived in the house for 47 years, that he had worked as a mail carrier after returning from military service, and that he took great pride in maintaining his small garden. What Ezra didn't learn was why Cornelius lived alone, why his grocery orders were so sparse, or why the house felt like a careful fortress against the outside world. The answer came in December, on a Friday delivery that arrived during a particularly brutal snowstorm. Ezra knocked on the door, stamping his feet to keep warm, but there was no response. He knocked again, louder this time, worry beginning to creep into his chest. Finally, the door opened to reveal Cornelius in his bathrobe, looking older and more fragile than Ezra had ever seen him. His usually neat hair was disheveled, and his hands shook as he reached for the grocery bag. "I'm sorry," Cornelius said, his voice barely audible. "I was lying down, not feeling quite myself today." Ezra noticed that the coffee tin wasn't in Cornelius's hand. "Sir, why don't you just pay me next time? It's no problem." But Cornelius shook his head firmly. No, I always pay. Just give me a moment." He shuffled back into the house, leaving the door open. Ezra waited on the porch, but when several minutes passed without Cornelius returning, he made a decision that went against company policy and stepped inside. The interior of 412 Willowbrook Lane was immaculate and heartbreaking. The furniture was old but well-maintained, arranged with military precision. But what caught Ezra's attention were the photographs. They covered every available surface: wedding pictures, family portraits, images of children and grandchildren at various ages, and in the center of the mantelpiece, a formal military portrait of a young man in dress blues who looked remarkably like Cornelius. Cornelius emerged from what appeared to be the kitchen, moving slowly and carrying his coffee tin. When he saw Ezra looking at the photographs, he froze. "I'm sorry," Ezra said quickly. "I was worried when you didn't come back. I shouldn't have come in." But Cornelius wasn't angry. Instead, he looked at the photographs with an expression of such profound sadness that Ezra felt his chest tighten. "That's my son," Cornelius said, pointing to the military portrait. "David, Second Lieutenant David Brightwater." The past tense hit Ezra like a physical blow. "Sir, I'm so sorry." Cornelius moved to the couch and sat down heavily, still holding the coffee tin. For a moment, Ezra thought the old man might ask him to leave. Instead, Cornelius began to speak in a voice so quiet that Ezra had to lean forward to hear. "Desert. Combat mission. 2009. His convoy was attacked during a routine patrol. He was 26 years old, married to a wonderful girl named Rebecca, and they had a 2-year-old daughter named Emma." Ezra sank into a chair across from Cornelius, the grocery bag forgotten on the floor beside him. After the funeral, Rebecca moved back to her family across the country. She said it was too hard to stay in Illinois. Too many memories. She promised to keep in touch, to bring Emma to visit. Cornelius's hands tightened around the coffee tin. "That was 15 years ago. I haven't seen my granddaughter since she was 3 years old." The weight of those words settled between them like stones. 15 years of silence, of holidays alone, of watching a granddaughter grow up through imagination rather than experience. Rebecca remarried when Emma was 7. Cornelius continued. Her new husband adopted Emma, gave her his name. Rebecca thought it would be easier for everyone if they made a clean break from the past. She said I reminded Emma too much of her father's death. Ezra felt tears pricking at his eyes. "That's not fair. Emma deserves to know her grandfather." "Maybe," Cornelius said with a slight shrug. "But Rebecca was protecting her daughter the only way she knew how. I can't fault a mother for trying to shield her child from grief." The room fell silent except for the sound of wind rattling the windows. Ezra looked at the photographs again, seeing them now with new understanding. This wasn't just a house where an old man lived alone. It was a shrine to a family that had been scattered by tragedy, a careful preservation of connections that no longer existed. "The groceries," Ezra said suddenly, understanding flooding through him. "You only order enough for one person because you're the only one left." Cornelius nodded. "I used to cook big meals every Sunday, hoping Rebecca might call and say they were coming to visit. The table could seat 8 people, and I'd set places for everyone, just in case." His voice broke slightly. "After 5 years of cooking for ghosts, I learned to buy only what I needed." Ezra's heart felt like it was breaking. He thought about his own family, scattered across different states, but still connected by phone calls and holiday visits. He couldn't imagine the kind of isolation Cornelius had endured. "Do you know where Emma is now?" Ezra asked gently. Cornelius reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was worn soft from handling, the creases deep from years of being opened and refolded. "She's 18 now," he said, unfolding the paper to reveal a printout from a local newspaper. "Emma Patterson. She graduated valedictorian from her high school last month. Rebecca kept her father's middle name, but gave her the adoptive father's last name." The newspaper clipping showed a beautiful young woman with Cornelius's pale blue eyes. And David's strong jawline. She was wearing a graduation cap and gown, holding a bouquet of flowers, smiling at the camera with the confidence of someone ready to take on the world. "How did you get this?" Ezra asked. "I hired a private investigator 5 years ago," Cornelius admitted. "Not to contact them, just to know they were okay. The investigator sends me updates once a year. Emma's starting college in the fall. She wants to study medicine." Ezra stared at the photograph, then at Cornelius's lined face, seeing the pride mixed with heartbreak in the old man's expression. "She looks just like you. She has her father's spirit," Cornelius said softly. "Always wanting to help people, to make the world better." David was like that too. Even as a little boy, he brought home stray cats and injured birds, convinced he could fix everything. "Sir, have you ever thought about reaching out? Maybe Emma would want to know about her grandfather." Cornelius carefully refolded the newspaper clipping and tucked it back into his pocket. Every day for 15 years, but Rebecca made her choice for good reasons. Emma has a stable family, a bright future. What right do I have to disrupt that? With reminders of loss and grief? The conversation was interrupted by Ezra's phone buzzing with delivery notifications. He looked at the screen reluctantly, knowing he had to continue his route, but not wanting to leave Cornelius alone with his ghosts. "I should go," he said, standing slowly. "But sir, if you ever want to talk, I'm here every Tuesday and Friday." Cornelius stood as well, moving to pay for his groceries from the coffee tin. "Thank you, Ezra. I haven't talked about David in a very long time." It felt good to say his name out loud again. Over the following weeks, their relationship deepened into something approaching friendship. Cornelius began inviting Ezra in for coffee when the weather was particularly cold, and their conversations ranged from memories of David to stories about Cornelius's years as a mail carrier. Ezra learned that the old man had once been quite social, hosting neighborhood barbecues and coaching Little League baseball. The isolation had been a gradual retreat, a way of protecting himself from forming new attachments that might lead to new losses. On Christmas Eve, Ezra made his final delivery of the year to 412 Willowbrook Lane. When Cornelius answered the door, he was holding an envelope instead of his usual coffee tin. "I have something for you," he said, his voice unusually formal. "A Christmas gift." Ezra accepted the envelope, feeling something substantial inside. "Sir, you didn't need to do this." "Open it," Cornelius insisted. Inside was a handwritten letter and a check for $500. Ezra's eyes widened as he read the amount. "Sir, I can't accept this. It's too much. Read the letter first," Cornelius said quietly. Ezra unfolded the paper, recognizing Cornelius's careful handwriting. "Dear Ezra, these past months have meant more to me than you could know. You reminded an old man that human connection is still possible, even after great loss. The money is not payment for your deliveries, but a gift for your education. I know you mentioned wanting to return to college. David believed in education, in young people pursuing their dreams. He would have liked you very much. Use this to take the next step in your life. You have given me the gift of remembering how to be human again. Merry Christmas, Cornelius." Ezra looked up to find Cornelius watching him with tears in his eyes. "I can't take your money," Ezra said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's not my money," Cornelius replied. "It's from David's life insurance policy. I've been saving it for 15 years, not knowing what to do with it. David would want it to help a young person build a future." The gesture was so profound, so generous, that Ezra felt overwhelmed. Here was a man who had lost everything that mattered to him, yet he was still finding ways to invest in hope. And possibility. There's something else, Cornelia said, pulling out another envelope. I wrote a letter to Emma through the private investigator. I didn't send it, but I wrote it. He handed Ezra the second envelope, this one addressed in careful script to Emma Patterson. I thought maybe if you felt it was appropriate, you could read it and tell me if I should send it. You're young, like she is. You might understand whether an old man's letter would be welcome or just another burden. That evening, Ezra sat in his small apartment reading Cornelius's letter to his granddaughter. It was beautiful and heartbreaking, full of memories of her father, expressions of love that had been held in silence for 15 years, and gentle questions about her life and dreams. There was no pressure for contact, no demands for reconciliation. Just the quiet hope of a grandfather who wanted his granddaughter to know she was loved and remembered. The next morning, Ezra made a decision that went beyond his role as a delivery driver. He called the private investigator and arranged to have the letter delivered to Emma, along with a note explaining that her grandfather was alive and thinking of her. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday delivery to 412 Willowbrook Lane, Ezra arrived to find Cornelius sitting on his front porch despite the January cold. The old man was holding his phone and crying. She called, Cornelius said, his voice shaking with emotion. Emma called. She's been wondering about her grandfather for years, but she didn't know how to find me. She thought I might be angry about the adoption, about the name change. Ezra sat down on the porch step beside Cornelius, feeling his own eyes fill with tears. She's coming to visit next weekend, Cornelius continued. She wants to know about her father, about our family. She said she's studying medicine because she wants to honor his memory by helping people. The transformation in Cornelius was remarkable. The careful isolation had been replaced by an energy and purpose that made him seem 10 years younger. He spent the week preparing the house, pulling out photo albums, cooking David's favorite meals, and replanting the garden with flowers he remembered Emma loving as a child. When Saturday arrived, Ezra found an excuse to drive by 412 Willowbrook Lane. Through the living room window, he could see Cornelius and a young woman sitting together on the couch, surrounded by photographs and photo albums. They were holding hands and talking, their heads close together, filling 15 years of silence with words and memories and love. The sight filled Ezra's heart with warmth and reminded him that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness are simply showing up, paying attention, and caring enough to see the humanity in others. His friendship with Cornelius had started with grocery deliveries, but it had become something much deeper, a reminder that connection and healing are always possible, even after the deepest losses. 6 months later, Ezra used Cornelius's gift to enroll in nursing school, inspired by Emma's commitment to healing and David's legacy of service. He still delivered groceries part-time, but now he saw each delivery as an opportunity to connect, to notice, to care. And every Tuesday and Friday, he still stopped by 412 Willowbrook Lane, though the grocery order had changed. Now it included ingredients for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. As Emma had moved back to Illinois to attend medical school and spend time with the grandfather she had never forgotten, the house on Willowbrook Lane was no longer a shrine to loss, but a home filled with love, memory, and the precious second chance that comes when people have the courage to reach across the silence and connect.